And thank you, everybody, for taking time to join us today. We're going to be talking about the Attemo program, and I want to give you a little background. I am a health service provider in psychology. I, like a lot of you, was working with children in a psychiatric hospital and then in a public school system for about 10 years, just outside of Boston, before working as a chief of child psychology and then a pediatric neuropsychology at a rehab hospital. So like a lot of you, I've been asked by parents if I could evaluate the attention of their children. And joining me today is Chris Houston, who is a senior educational consultant, and he'll be in the chat box answering any questions that you may have. So welcome, everybody, and I look forward to answering your questions as we go along. This is the first time we've done the interpretation webinar, and we hope that you'll have questions that we'll be able to answer. Our agenda is as follows. We're going to be looking at what is the current state of the art in assessing attention. What do people currently do? What are they using? And how helpful is that? We'll look also at what tools are available from Pearson, and in particular, this brand new objective measure called Attemo. Some of you are going to be wondering how recently normed was this and how big was that sample, and we can certainly answer that question. We'll also look at research studies that may be conducted using this program to further explore the subject of attention in children, adults, and adolescents. There is a brand new technical manual that will be available to you, and I'm relying on some of that data to help with the interpretation today. You may be wondering, okay, I've got this attention test. How do I interpret the results? What will help me do that? And what case studies do we have that will help? And that's really what we're going to spend the bulk of our time on this afternoon. So when you think about attention problems, you may be wondering, well, how's that going to present in school? And what's the adverse impact of having an attention problem? What types of students that I'm currently working with may have that problem? Or who's going to be referred to me in private practice? And what's the referral question going to be? It may be that the child has been diagnosed with an attention deficit. But I think it's important to recognize that's not the only child that could have an attention problem. In fact, in some cases, they may do quite well on tasks that require just simple registration and repetition. The next class of students we need to be paying attention to are children that may have sustained a traumatic brain injury, or TBI. Many of those individuals will present with an attention problem with no premorbid history. A lot of times, children that have learning disabilities in school will present with attention problems. And as my colleague Chris will remind us, children identified as having emotional behavior disorders are also likely to present with this. Oftentimes, children with attention problems just underachieve. And so in some of the research that was conducted by Joni Holmes and others in the north of England, children weren't identified as learning disabled or as ADD, but for one reason or another, they showed attention and working memory problems, and they were not doing well academically. They were underachievers. And it wasn't for lack of effort. Another group that I think is important for us to recognize is children whose parents may have been drinking when they were in utero. The first type of this is called the fetal alcohol syndrome, but I think it's important to recognize that sometimes children that don't fulfill all the criteria may still present with having attention problems when they have fetal alcohol effects. So, how does an attention problem affect academic performance? These are some academic areas for us to remember. Just learning to read, of course, associating symbols with sounds and making that connection phonologically. That will involve reading, and that will involve attention. Now, more importantly, when the child is asked to pay attention to what they're reading, not just decode, but also to try to understand what a passage is all about, and particularly longer pages and sequences where comprehension and inference is required, then attention clearly is going to play a role there. And what you may find is that when a child's attention improves, their comprehension gets better because it's not so much a decoding problem as it is one involving working memory and attention. Sometimes just thinking about what am I going to write and in what order and how am I going to sequence those ideas and how am I going to make it coherent or persuasive will involve attention too. Arithmetic is a very good, pragmatic example of a working memory task that we ask children, and for that matter, other individuals to do, that may involve different processes, different numbers, different steps that they have to pay attention to. Oftentimes, teachers will say a child's not listening when they're not paying attention. So listening and complying with teacher instructions and complying with behavior all involve attention. And for many of you working in schools, that's pretty evident. So a question might be, how do you currently assess attention? And for many school psychologists, they simply will say, well, I give the Wechsler scale 5th edition Digispan test. So that's going to measure registration, repetition of auditory input of numbers. All that you're asking the child to do is pay attention and say them back to you. But the question might be, is that sufficient? So, in some times, some circumstances, some schools, and even hospitals, you may see reference to the Connor scales, particularly the parent and teacher rating scales. But I'm going to ask the question of, is that all you need? Is that going to answer the question for you? And that's probably one reason why many of you are on today's webinar. Now, in order to better understand this, I thought it would be important to present this framework for understanding human attention. Michael Posner, back in 1990, described it in this way. He said, first of all, we have to recognize that attention involves an alerting system. Is the child, or for that matter, an individual of any age, showing a readiness to respond? Are they aroused? Are they ready to react? And so when you have a patient who is comatose, clearly there's a question about how attentive or alert they could be. Sorry about this. Can I call you back? Thank you. So, the alerting system involves a readiness to respond. And so the question might be, is the subject actively engaged? Now, there are times when you're going to have a person who is unable to be aroused or able to be alert because they have sleep deprivation. Or it may be that they're influenced by alcohol or drugs. And so what you may see is there are times when the alerting system is not working properly because someone has ingested a substance that's having an adverse impact on their performance. Posner also talked about the orienting system, and that means selecting priorities that a person should pay attention to. So, for example, if you're in a library, can you find the exact book that you're looking for? Or if you're looking for ingredients in the kitchen, can you select the one that you want? And if you found one, or you find that that's not what you're looking for, can you change it to orient to something else? So Posner and Pearson then described this as the orienting system. Now, thirdly, in 2012, they updated that model to include an executive system. So to what extent is attention controlled? Is it goal-directed? And what they talk about is attention involves setting up the task of what to pay attention to, and then keeping the mind focused on that. So can you maintain focus? And when you need to, can you switch? So the executive system does play a role in allowing the person to divide attention or to change attention. And Klingberg talked about a spotlight, focusing on a target. That's what's allowing us to attend. It's like a spotlight in the brain that allows us to particularly focus and pay attention to one thing.